Well, when the market sunk to its low on March 23, we all shuddered at the hit to our super.
And for some time now, the big super funds have been trying to manage investor expectations because for years we have escaped economic downturns in Australia.
Chief Investment Officer of AustralianSuper, Mark Delaney, has a staggering $180 billion in funds under management. I asked him how he'd gone with members and what his returns were this year.
Yes, thanks for asking that. The returns have been surprisingly good. The returns to 30 June for our balance plan, the one-year returns, were 0.50%, but the three-year returns are still 7.5%. So despite COVID and all the economic carnage it's caused, over the last 3 years, members have still made 7.5% per annum on their super.
Yeah.
Which is pretty incredible, really.
Well, you'd think so, yeah. And in a couple of years' time, if I asked you about the 3 years, what do you reckon it'll be? We like to say that we're aiming to get inflation plus 4 or 5%. So a number of 7's a pretty good number, we think. That's what we're aiming to get. So if we've got the same number in 3 years' time, we've done our job. Right. Well, that is very interesting. Mark, in terms of looking at risk through COVID, how do you see investment risk at the moment?
Investing is a lot like driving if your lights on high beam. You're not looking at the next bend, you're looking at the one after and the one after that. So investors, by looking forward, have been trying to look through COVID and see what the recovery looks like and been positioning their portfolios along those lines, and we've been a part of that. The second thing is that the structural factors, like technology stocks, which have done very well during the COVID period, we've owned for many, many years beforehand, thinking these structural trends were going to take place, and COVID has actually accelerated the trends which were occurring prior to that. And the third thing, when I think about investing, is that how can you invest your money and receive 0.5% or 0% like what you get for fixed income and cash? No one's going to build retirement balances on those numbers. And so the trick really is to work out where to deploy your cash and not hold too much of it.
And you mentioned, of course, that the big tech stocks there, as you say, you've held for some time. Do you think you will be doubling down on those huge tech stocks in the US? And to what extent do some of our tech stocks here and our buy now, pay later stocks look attractive?
I won't comment on particular stocks, particularly the Australian ones, because there's lots of interest around that topic. But we think these tech stocks are going to be very dominant long-term businesses. Now, at times we'll prune our exposure when prices have run up too hard and add to it when the market comes off. But we're looking to own these stocks for the very long term. Stocks like Amazon, Apple, with their dominant cloud computing businesses, Microsoft, we think these stocks are going to be around for a very long time.
What do you make of the money that has been taken out of super, particularly by younger people, some of whom obviously have really needed it through COVID? How damaging is that to their investments and to the sector?
COVID's been a very difficult experience for a lot of people, and you really feel for people who had lost their jobs. They might have had a casual work at a cafe or a restaurant, lost their jobs, basically had no income, and getting money out of super was the only access to sort of keeping themselves going. I think that's highly appropriate and the wise thing to do in those circumstances. Unfortunately, though, for those people and for other people who have taken it out, it does damage their long-term retirement savings. So if you're in your 30s and you spend all your super, you're really saying you're going to have substantially less long-term savings and substantially lower retirement income by the time you get to 65. Because dollars put in when you're younger are 4 or 5 times more valuable than dollars put in when you're older. So it's very hard for these people to catch up after the COVID environment, even if the system allowed them to contribute more.
So what do you make of, I noticed the Prime Minister's looking potentially to put the super guarantee contributions, that rise from 9.5 to 12, to weighing up putting that on pause. Where do you sit there?
I think we should stick with what was already legislated, which was well debated at the time, which is we should go to 12%.
Even in these conditions?
It's a long-term structural change. People are going to be retiring for 20 years, potentially 30 years. And no way is 9% going to be enough for those people to have a really decent retirement income. And if we don't do that, more people will roll onto the pension. So this is a structural thing which is going to operate over the whole 30 years. And the current circumstances, while they're being a little bit difficult, won't be around forever.
And Mark, what about there? I am talking to you, of course, in Melbourne there, and this was Melbourne was just taking off before COVID, wasn't it? All the funds under management were heading to Melbourne, apart from anything else. How do you see a way out of this lockdown mess? And what should state and governments? What would you like to see from them, state and federal governments?
So I think COVID is essentially a health crisis, which is developed into an economic crisis, but it's predominantly a health crisis, and people are putting their health first. Solving the health issue will be the most important thing, and that revolves around three things. Early identification, which is to do much better testing regimes, quicker and faster and cheaper. Better treatment regimes which we've already seen taking place, and so it's a much less deadly disease than what it was previously. And hopefully, in the not-too-distant future, a vaccine which will limit COVID spread completely. So if we can address the health issues, we'll then be able to address the economic issues.
And I guess the other thing that's happened this year, partly through COVID and supply changes, is our relationship with China and changes to our foreign investment rules even more broadly than China. What's your response to that?
Well, we're in the world we live in, but it's a world which is really emerging as a battle between the great powers or the emerging powers, and Australia is a very small player in that battle. The world pre-COVID or say 2015 was a multilateral world. We're moving away from that very quickly and moving away from international institutions very quickly. Us as investors have to acknowledge what the world is and build a portfolio around those circumstances.
Yeah. And so how would you be building a portfolio for the long term right now as a retail investor?
Well, the most important thing in building a portfolio is to work out what is the purpose of that portfolio. And the purpose, if you're building a retirement portfolio, is to have enough retirement income. And you can use the time horizon, which might be 20, 30, 40 years, to buy a lot of equities and let them go up over time. That's the key thing, is to have enough growth assets in your portfolio to achieve your objective. If you've got a different objective, saving for a housing deposit or a car or something, well, then you have a different portfolio. But if you're building a retirement portfolio, a growth-orientated portfolio, invested and managed for the long term is the best thing to do.
Mark Delaney, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.